car is this? There's no way you own a Tesla like this.
It's mine, officer. I already showed you my license and registration.
That registration doesn't prove anything. Either you consent to a search or you're getting arrested.
Arrested for what exactly?
Move aside, I'm going to search.
Chief Teresa Murphy, the newly appointed police chief who had been hired specifically to reform the Parkdale Police Department after 3 Department of Justice investigations documenting a pattern of racial profiling, spent her 3rd day on the job driving a pearl white Tesla Model S Plaid through District 5, the area with the highest number of complaints, to see which officers would pull her over based solely on the color of her skin and the car she was driving. Officer Norman Bishop, a 9-year veteran with 3 prior complaints about racially motivated stops that had all been dismissed with verbal warnings, saw the Tesla driven by a black woman on Highway 101 and immediately pulled her over, demanded her license and registration, and when Chief Murphy asked why she had been stopped, Bishop ignored the question and stated there was no way she could own a $108,000 vehicle. When Murphy asked what violation had justified the stop, Bishop became aggressive and threatened to arrest her if she didn't consent to a search of her vehicle. And when Murphy asked, arrested for what exactly? Bishop demanded she step out, searched her Tesla without consent, and found a Parkdale Police Department folder on the passenger seat that made him suspicious enough to confront her, only to discover that Murphy had been standing at the trunk of her Tesla, writing his name and badge number on an official termination notice documenting the exact constitutional violations he had just committed. And when Bishop snatched the paper from her hands and read his own name on a termination letter signed by Chief Teresa Murphy, his face went pale because he realized the black woman he had just profiled and illegally searched was his new boss, and his career was over. What? What Officer Norman Bishop didn't know was that Chief Teresa Murphy had reviewed every personnel file in District 5 on her first day and had identified 8 officers with patterns of dismissed complaints. That she had seen Bishop's 3 prior complaints, all from black or Latino drivers in expensive cars, all involving the same behavior he just demonstrated with her. That she had prepared blank termination forms that morning, signed and dated, carried in a Parkdale Police Department folder specifically so any officer who stopped her would recognize it. That while Bishop was illegally searching her Tesla, Murphy was standing at the trunk filling in his name, badge number, and a detailed description of every constitutional violation he'd committed in the past 8 minutes. That Bishop's decision to pull over a professional black woman in a Tesla, demand proof of ownership based on nothing but racial assumptions, threaten arrest for asserting her rights, and search her vehicle after she explicitly denied consent would result in his immediate termination on the side of Highway 101, criminal charges for violating civil rights, loss of his law enforcement certification, and his name becoming permanently associated with one of the most public examples of racial profiling, leading to a police chief firing an officer on the spot. Before we go further, what city or country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. And if you believe a black woman should be able to drive her own car without being racially profiled by her own officers, like this video and subscribe. The city of Parkdale, California had been dealing with the same problem for years, and everyone knew it. The police department had been the subject of 3 separate investigations by the Department of Justice over the past decade, all of them focused on the same issue. A documented pattern of racial profiling that had resulted in hundreds of complaints from black and Latino residents who claimed they had been stopped, questioned, and searched without any legal justification. The complaints had been filed, reviewed, and in most cases dismissed with minimal consequences for the officers involved. Verbal warnings, counseling, retraining, but never termination, never real accountability. The community had been asking for reform for years, and the city council had finally responded by bringing in someone from outside the department to clean it up. Chief Teresa Murphy was 44 years old with 21 years in law enforcement, and she had built a reputation as a reformer who didn't tolerate officers who ignored the Constitution. She had worked her way up from patrol officer to detective to captain in the Dallas Police Department, and over the years she had earned respect for being fair, transparent, and willing to hold officers accountable when they crossed the line. When the mayor of Parkdale called her in August 2024 and offered her the position of police chief with a clear mandate to identify and remove officers who engaged in racial profiling, Murphy had accepted immediately. She knew what she was walking into. She had reviewed the complaint data before taking the job. She had read the DOJ reports. She knew the names of the officers who had been the subject of multiple complaints. She knew the patterns, and she knew that words and policies and training programs wouldn't be enough. She needed to see for herself which officers would follow the law and which ones would let their biases override their training. Murphy officially started as chief of the Parkdale Police Department on Monday, September 16, 2024. On her first day, she spent 8 hours reviewing personnel files. She focused on District 5, the affluent area north of the city, where the majority of racial profiling complaints had been filed. She found 8 officers in that district who had been the subject of multiple complaints over the past 5 years. All 8 had patterns, all 8 had been investigated, and all 8 were still working patrol with nothing more than verbal warnings in their files. One of those officers was Norman Bishop. Norman Bishop was 36 years old and had been with the Parkdale Police Department for 9 years. He worked District 5, patrolling the highways and residential streets of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the city. Over the past 6 years, Bishop had been the subject of 3 formal complaints, all filed by people of color, all involving traffic stops of drivers in expensive cars. The first complaint had come in April 2021 from Jerry Allen, a 38-year-old black attorney who had been driving his Mercedes-Benz S-Class home from work when Bishop pulled him over on Highway 101. Allen asked why he had been stopped. Bishop claimed suspicious driving, but couldn't articulate what that meant. Bishop accused Allen of drug trafficking, searched his car without consent, and detained him for 45 minutes while running repeated checks on the vehicle and Allen's background. Allen had no criminal record. The car wasn't stolen. Bishop found nothing. Allen filed a complaint with Internal Affairs. The complaint was investigated, and Bishop was found to have acted within department guidelines. He received a verbal warning about better documentation of reasonable suspicion. No discipline, no consequences. The second complaint came in August 2022 from Carlos Rivera, a 41-year-old Latino business owner driving a BMW 7 Series through District 5 with his 12-year-old son in the passenger seat. Bishop pulled him over, claiming the window tint was too dark. Dashcam footage later showed the tint was within legal limits. Bishop demanded proof of ownership for the vehicle and searched it without consent, while Rivera's son watched, terrified. Rivera filed a complaint. Internal Affairs investigated. Bishop received a verbal warning about verifying equipment violations before initiating stops. No discipline, no consequences. The third complaint came in June 2023 from Dr. Angela Foster, a 45-year-old black physician driving an Audi A8. Bishop pulled her over and accused her of driving a stolen vehicle, despite the fact that the registration clearly showed the car belonged to her. He detained her for 50 minutes, running repeated checks, treating her like a suspect. Dr. Foster filed a complaint with both Internal Affairs and the ACLU. The complaint was investigated. Bishop received counseling on community relations, no discipline, no consequences. Chief Teresa Murphy read all 3 complaints on her first day. She saw the pattern: black and Latino drivers, expensive cars, assumptions of criminality, searches without consent, and a department that had documented the pattern but refused to act on it. On Tuesday, September 17th, Murphy's second day, she spent the morning in meetings with the command staff, explaining her expectations. She told them the days of dismissing complaints with verbal warnings were over. She told them officers who violated constitutional rights would be held accountable. Some of the command staff nodded, others looked uncomfortable. One captain, a 28-year veteran named Richard Hayes, asked if Murphy was planning to go after officers who had long careers with the department. Murphy's response was direct. I'm going after officers who violate people's rights. If that describes someone with a long career, then yes. That afternoon, Murphy did something unusual. She went home to her apartment in the neighboring city of Riverside, changed out of her uniform, and got into her personal vehicle, a pearl white Tesla Model S Plaid that she had purchased 18 months earlier with money she had saved over 2 decades of working overtime and side jobs in security consulting. The Tesla had cost $108,000, Murphy was proud of it. She had earned it. She drove back to Parkdale and spent 2 hours driving through District 5. She obeyed every traffic law. She stayed in her lane. She used her turn signals. She drove the speed limit. She was testing whether any officers would pull her over based solely on the fact that a black woman was driving an expensive car. She was pulled over once that day by an officer named Martinez. Martinez approached politely, asked for her license and registration, and when Murphy asked why she had been stopped, Martinez admitted he didn't have a specific violation, but thought the car looked out of place in the area. When Murphy identified herself as the new police chief, Martinez apologized immediately and explained he had been told to watch for stolen vehicles in the area. Murphy made a note of the interaction, but didn't discipline Martinez because he had been honest, had not searched her vehicle, and had backed off the moment he realized his stop lacked legal justification. On Wednesday, September 18th, Murphy's third day, she prepared for another test. That morning, she filled out 5 blank termination forms. Each form had the Parkdale Police Department seal at the top. Each form had the date, September 18th, 2024. Each form had her signature at the bottom, Chief Teresa Murphy. The fields for officer name, badge number, and reason for termination were left blank. Murphy placed the forms inside an official Parkdale Police Department folder, a distinctive blue folder with gold lettering that any officer in the department would immediately recognize. She dressed in business casual clothes, a charcoal gray blazer, dark navy slacks, a white blouse, professional black flats. She looked like what she was, a professional woman with authority and resources. She got in her Tesla and drove to District 5. It was 3:30 p.m. on a sunny September afternoon. Highway 101 North was busy with early commute traffic. Murphy merged onto the highway near the Oakwood Boulevard exit and drove north at exactly 65 miles per hour, the posted speed limit. She stayed in the right lane. She didn't weave. She didn't speed. She didn't tailgate. She was committing no violations. Behind her, Officer Norman Bishop was on patrol in District 5. He had been working the highway corridor that afternoon, watching for speeders and equipment violations. At 3:45 p.m., Bishop saw a pearl white Tesla Model S Plaid in the right lane ahead of him. The car was obeying the speed limit. No erratic driving, no visible equipment violations. Nothing that would constitute probable cause for a traffic stop. But Bishop saw a black woman behind the wheel of a $108,000 luxury vehicle, and his instincts, shaped by years of operating on assumptions rather than evidence, told him something was wrong. Bishop activated his lights and pulled the Tesla over. Murphy saw the flashing red and blue lights in her rearview mirror and felt a familiar mix of frustration and determination. This was exactly what she had been testing for. She signaled right, moved onto the wide paved shoulder of Highway 101, put the Tesla in park, and turned off the engine. She placed her hands on the steering wheel where they would be visible. The Parkdale Police Department folder sat on the passenger seat beside her. Bishop exited his patrol car and approached the driver's side of the Tesla. He had his right hand resting on his duty belt, a posture designed to communicate authority. When he reached the window, he looked down at Murphy, and the first words out of his mouth weren't a greeting or an explanation of why he had initiated the stop. They were an assumption. License and registration, and proof this vehicle belongs to you. Murphy looked up at Bishop. Her expression was calm, but her voice carried a deliberate precision. I've already shown you my license and registration on the dashboard. Can you tell me why you pulled me over? Bishop didn't answer the question. He just repeated the demand, his tone sharper. I need to see proof of ownership, registration, and title. Murphy reached slowly into the center console and pulled out her registration, which showed the Tesla was registered to Teresa Murphy at an address in Riverside, California. She handed it through the window to Bishop, who examined it carefully. The registration was current. The vehicle identification number matched the Tesla. Everything was in order. Bishop looked back at Murphy. This your car? Murphy's voice stayed calm. Yes. As you can see from the registration, it's in my name. Bishop's tone turned suspicious. How do you afford a car like this? Murphy's eyes narrowed slightly. That's not a legal question, officer. Is there a specific traffic violation you observed that justified this stop? Bishop didn't like the pushback. In his experience, people who questioned him were people who had something to hide. You're driving a $100,000 car through this area. That's reason enough for me to verify things. Murphy's voice stayed level, but there was an edge to it now. Driving an expensive car is not illegal, and it's not probable cause for a traffic stop. So I'll ask you again. What specific violation did I commit? Bishop's jaw tightened. Step out of the vehicle. Murphy didn't move. I'm not stepping out unless you can provide a legal reason for this stop. You pulled me over without cause, and now you're demanding I exit my vehicle. That's a violation of my Fourth Amendment rights. Bishop's voice got louder. If you don't step out of this vehicle right now, you're getting arrested. Murphy looked at him directly. Arrested for what? Bishop leaned closer to the window, his voice cold. That registration doesn't prove anything. Either you consent to a search or you're getting arrested. Your choice. Murphy held Bishop's gaze for a long moment. She could refuse and force Bishop to either back down or escalate to physical force. But Murphy wanted to see how far Bishop would go. She wanted the full extent of this officer's willingness to violate rights documented, and she knew his body cam was recording every word. Murphy opened the door and stepped out of the Tesla. Her movements were slow and deliberate, her hands visible at all times. As she stood on the highway shoulder with traffic passing in the left lanes, she spoke clearly and loudly enough that Bishop's body cam would pick up every word. For the record, I am stepping out of this vehicle under protest. I have not committed any traffic violation. I have not consented to this stop. And I am clearly stating that I do not consent to any search of my person or my vehicle. Bishop ignored her. Hands on the car. Murphy complied, placing her hands on the side of the Tesla while Bishop patted her down. He found nothing. Then Bishop walked to the passenger side of the vehicle and opened the door without asking permission. Inside, on the passenger seat, was the blue Parkdale Police Department folder. Bishop saw it immediately, the distinctive blue cover with gold lettering, the official department seal. He stared at it. Why would this woman have internal police documents? Bishop looked back at Murphy, who was now standing near the trunk of the Tesla, no longer at the side where he had told her to stay. She had something in her hands, a piece of paper, and she was writing on it using the trunk as a surface. Bishop walked toward her. What are you writing, and why do you have department documents in your car? Murphy didn't look up. She kept writing. I'm documenting the violations you just committed. Bishop's voice got defensive. Violations? I didn't violate anything. Give me that paper. Murphy finished writing and looked up at Bishop. You pulled me over without stating a traffic violation. You demanded proof of ownership based on the assumption that I couldn't afford this vehicle. You threatened to arrest me when I asked what I was being arrested for. And you searched my vehicle after I explicitly stated I did not consent. All of that is documented. Bishop reached out and snatched the paper from Murphy's hands. He looked at it. It was an official Parkdale Police Department termination notice. Parkdale Police Department termination notice. Officer, name, Norman Bishop, badge. Number 4891. Date, September 18th, 2024. Reason, unlawful stop without probable cause. Search conducted after explicit denial of consent. Fourth Amendment violations, pattern of dismissed complaints indicating racial profiling. Effective, immediate signed, Chief Teresa Murphy. Bishop stared at the document. He read it once, then read it again. His hands started shaking. He looked at the name, Norman Bishop, his name. He looked at the signature at the bottom, Chief Teresa Murphy. He looked up at Murphy, his face pale, his mouth open, but no words coming out. What? What is this? Who are you? Murphy's expression didn't change. Her voice was calm, cold, and final. I'm Chief Teresa Murphy, your new boss. I started Monday. Bishop's brain tried to process what he was hearing. You're the chief? Yes, and you just failed a constitutional policing test. Bishop's voice came out desperate. This was a setup. You set me up. Murphy shook her head. I drove a legally owned vehicle on a public highway while obeying every traffic law. If that's a setup, then every person in this city is setting up officers every time they leave their house. You had a choice, Officer Bishop. You could have driven past me. You could have followed me to see if I committed an actual violation. But instead, you pulled me over based on bias. You assumed a black woman couldn't own this car. You threatened to arrest me for asserting my rights. And you searched my vehicle without consent. Those are constitutional violations, and they're all documented on your body cam. Bishop looked at the termination notice in his shaking hands. Chief, I didn't know who you were. I was just doing my job. You weren't doing your job. You were violating someone's rights. The only difference between me and the other people you've done this to is that I have the authority to hold you accountable. Murphy pulled out her radio. This is Chief Murphy. I need a supervisor to respond to Highway 101 North near the Oakwood Boulevard exit. I have an officer who conducted an unlawful stop and search. I'm relieving him of duty. The dispatcher's voice came back, confused. Chief Murphy, can you confirm? You heard me correctly. Send a supervisor now. Bishop stood frozen on the highway shoulder, still holding his own termination letter. You're firing me? Right here? On the side of the road? Murphy's expression showed no sympathy. You violated my constitutional rights. You conducted an illegal search. You threatened to arrest me for asserting my rights, and you did all of it because you saw a black woman in an expensive car and assumed I was a criminal. Yes, Officer Bishop, I'm firing you right here. Within 5 minutes, a supervisor's vehicle pulled up behind Bishop's patrol car. Sergeant Luis Ramirez stepped out, and the moment he saw Chief Murphy standing on the highway shoulder, his expression shifted from confusion to concern. Chief Murphy, what's going on? Murphy gestured toward Bishop. Officer Bishop pulled me over without probable cause. He demanded proof of ownership for my vehicle based on racial assumptions. He threatened to arrest me when I refused consent to a search. He then searched my vehicle anyway. His body cam has the entire interaction recorded. I want him off the street immediately. Ramirez looked at Bishop. Is that true? Bishop tried to find words that would make the situation better, but nothing came out that would help. I didn't know she was the chief. Ramirez shook his head. That doesn't matter. Did you have probable cause for the stop? Bishop hesitated. She was driving an expensive car. It looked... I thought... Ramirez closed his eyes for a moment like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Then he looked at Murphy. Chief, I apologize. This is unacceptable. Murphy nodded. Officer Bishop is suspended effective immediately. I want his badge, his weapon, and his body cam secured as evidence. He is not to return to duty pending a formal investigation. Ramirez turned to Bishop. Badge and weapon. Now. Bishop's hands were still shaking as he unclipped his badge from his uniform and handed it to Ramirez. Then he unholstered his service weapon, cleared it, and handed that over as well. The look on his face was a mixture of shock, humiliation, and the slow realization that his career was over. Murphy looked at Ramirez. Make sure his body cam footage is preserved and logged as evidence. I'll be filing a full report when I get back to headquarters. Ramirez nodded. Yes, Chief. Murphy got back into her Tesla, started the engine, and drove away, leaving Bishop standing on the highway shoulder with no badge, no weapon, and no future in law enforcement. Chief Teresa Murphy walked into Parkdale Police Department headquarters 2 hours later and immediately called an emergency meeting with the command staff. Within 30 minutes, every sergeant, lieutenant, and captain in the building was sitting in the conference room waiting to hear why the new chief had summoned them with such urgency. Murphy stood at the head of the table with a laptop connected to the projector. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She opened the laptop, pulled up Bishop's body cam footage, and pressed play. The room went silent as the video showed Bishop approaching the Tesla, demanding proof of ownership without stating a reason for the stop, ignoring Murphy's questions about probable cause, and then threatening arrest when she refused to consent to a search. The audio captured every word clearly, including Bishop's statement that the registration doesn't prove anything and his threat. Either you consent to a search or you're getting arrested. Then the footage showed the search. Murphy's voice on the recording clear and explicit. I do not consent to any search of my person or my vehicle. Bishop ignoring her completely and searching anyway. The moment when Bishop saw the Parkdale PD folder. The moment when he confronted Murphy at the trunk and snatched the paper from her hands. The moment when he read his own name on the termination letter. When the video ended, Murphy looked around the table at the faces of her command staff. Some looked shocked. Others looked uncomfortable. A few looked like they had been expecting something like this. Murphy spoke, her voice calm but carrying a weight that made it clear this was not a discussion. Officer Norman Bishop pulled me over this afternoon without probable cause. He demanded proof of ownership for my vehicle based solely on racial assumptions. He threatened to arrest me for asserting my Fourth Amendment rights. He conducted an illegal search after I explicitly denied consent. Everything you just saw is documented on his body cam, and I have my own audio recording as backup. Captain Richard Hayes, who had been with the department for 28 years, cleared his throat. Chief, with all due respect, did you set Officer Bishop up? I mean, you were driving that car specifically to see if someone would stop you. Murphy turned to face him directly. I drove a legally owned vehicle on a public highway while obeying every traffic law. If that's a setup, then every citizen in the city is setting up officers every time they drive. Bishop had a choice. He could have followed me to observe if I committed a violation. But instead, he pulled me over based on bias. And when I asserted my rights, he violated them. That's not a setup. That's a test of whether an officer will follow the Constitution, and Bishop failed. Murphy pulled up another document on the screen. It was Bishop's personnel file, and highlighted in yellow were the 3 prior complaints. Complaint 1, Murphy read aloud. April 2021, Jerry Allen, black male, attorney, driving a Mercedes. Stopped by Officer Bishop without cause. Bishop accused him of drug trafficking and searched the vehicle without consent. Allen filed a formal complaint. The complaint was investigated and dismissed with a verbal warning to Bishop. Murphy moved to the next highlighted section. Complaint 2. August 2022. Carlos Rivera, Latino male, business owner, driving a BMW. Bishop claimed illegal window tint despite dash cam showing it was legal. Searched vehicle without consent while Rivera's 12-year-old son watched. Rivera filed a complaint, investigated, and dismissed with verbal counseling. Murphy moved to the third. Complaint 3, June 2023. Dr. Angela Foster, black female, physician, driving an Audi. Bishop accused her of driving a stolen vehicle despite registration proving ownership. Detained her 50 minutes. Foster filed complaints with Internal Affairs and the ACLU, investigated and dismissed with counseling on community relations. Murphy looked around the table. 3 complaints over 6 years, all describing the exact same behavior I experienced today, all dismissed. And Bishop kept doing it because no one in this department held him accountable. That stops now. Lieutenant Anthony Reese, head of Internal Affairs, spoke up. Chief, are you terminating him based on this one stop, or are you using the prior complaints as justification? Murphy's answer was immediate. I'm terminating him because he violated the constitutional rights of a citizen today. The prior complaints show this wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern this department documented and ignored. I'm not ignoring it. She closed the laptop. I was hired to reform this department. The mayor made it clear the community has lost trust in us because officers like Bishop have been allowed to operate without consequences. I've been on the job 3 days, and I've already identified 8 officers with similar patterns. Bishop is the first termination. He won't be the last. Murphy paused and let that sink in. I'm holding a press conference tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. I'm going to show the body cam footage. I'm going to explain why Bishop was terminated. And I'm going to make it clear that this department will no longer tolerate officers who profile people based on race. If any of you have a problem with that, you can submit your resignation now. No one spoke. The room stayed silent. Murphy picked up her laptop. Meeting adjourned. Chief Teresa Murphy held the press conference the next morning at 10 a.m., and every local news station in Northern California sent reporters and cameras to cover it. Murphy stood at the podium in full uniform with the Parkdale Police Department seal behind her, and she didn't sugarcoat what had happened. Yesterday afternoon, I was pulled over by Officer Norman Bishop while driving my personal vehicle on Highway 101. I was obeying all traffic laws. I committed no violations. Officer Bishop stopped me without probable cause, demanded proof of ownership for my vehicle, threatened to arrest me when I asked what I was being arrested for, and then searched my car after I explicitly stated I did not consent. All of this was captured on his body cam, and I'm releasing that footage to the public today. The footage played on the screen behind her, and the room full of reporters watched in silence as Bishop pulled Murphy over, demanded documents, ignored her questions, threatened arrest, and conducted an illegal search. When the video showed Bishop snatching the paper from Murphy's hands and reading his own termination letter, there were audible reactions from the journalists in the room. Murphy continued. Officer Bishop has been terminated effective immediately. His termination is based on his violation of Fourth Amendment rights, his use of racial profiling as justification for a stop, and a documented pattern of similar behavior over the past 6 years. This department has ignored complaints like this for too long. That ends now. The press conference made national news within hours. The headlines were everywhere. New police chief fires officer who racially profiled her. Cop finds own termination letter after illegal search. Bodycam shows officer threatening chief with arrest during unconstitutional stop. Officer Norman Bishop, through his union representative, filed for arbitration 2 weeks later, claiming wrongful termination and arguing that Murphy had entrapped him by deliberately driving an expensive car to provoke a stop. The arbitration hearing took place in December 2024. Bishop's attorney argued that Murphy had created an impossible situation, that any officer would have stopped a vehicle that seemed out of place, and that Bishop had acted within his discretion. The arbitrator, a retired judge named Judith Hopkins with 30 years of experience, reviewed the body cam footage, Bishop's personnel file showing the 3 prior complaints, and Murphy's testimony. The decision came back 3 days later and was unequivocal. The termination was upheld. Judge Hopkins' written decision stated that Bishop had conducted a stop without reasonable suspicion, had threatened arrest without legal justification, and had searched a vehicle after being explicitly denied consent. The decision also noted that Bishop's prior complaints showed a clear pattern of racially biased policing that the department had failed to address, and that Chief Murphy's testing method was a legitimate tool for identifying officers who would not follow constitutional standards. Norman Bishop was 36 years old with 9 years of law enforcement experience, and his career was over. He applied to other police departments in neighboring cities, but every background check revealed his termination for constitutional violations and racial profiling. No agency would hire him. He lost his law enforcement certification. His name was flagged in every database used by police departments across California. He eventually found work in private security at a shopping mall, making $42,000 a year, less than half of what he had earned as a police officer. And his name remained permanently attached to the case. It was used in police training programs across the country as an example of what happens when officers let bias override the law. The body cam footage of him reading his own termination letter on the highway shoulder was shown in academies nationwide. Chief Teresa Murphy implemented sweeping reforms in the months that followed. Every traffic stop now required officers to document specific, reasonable suspicion or probable cause in their reports before initiating the stop. Bodycam footage was reviewed randomly by an independent civilian oversight board. Officers with patterns of stops that disproportionately targeted minorities were flagged for retraining or dismissal. Within the first 18 months, complaints of racial profiling dropped by 68%. Community trust surveys showed significant improvement. The Department of Justice ended its oversight in January 2026, concluding that Parkdale PD had met all benchmarks for reform. Murphy identified the 8 other officers with complaint patterns similar to Bishop's. 2 were terminated after refusing retraining and continuing to engage in biased stops. 6 were placed on probation and required to complete constitutional policing courses. All 8 had their stop data monitored weekly. If racial disparities appeared in their stops, they were removed from patrol. The message was clear throughout the department. Racial profiling would not be tolerated, and officers who couldn't follow the Constitution would not keep their badges. Captain Jennifer Walsh, the District 5 commander who had overseen Bishop and dismissed his complaints, was demoted to lieutenant and reassigned to administrative duties. She retired 6 months later. Lieutenant Anthony Reese, who had headed internal affairs and signed off on the dismissals of Bishop's complaints, was placed on probation and required to undergo bias training. He remained in his position, but under close supervision. 2 years after Murphy took over as chief, the Parkdale Police Department is recognized nationally as a model for reform. Stop data analyzed by an independent firm shows racial disparities in traffic stops have decreased by 73%. Community surveys show trust in police has improved significantly. Officers report feeling more confident in their work because the standards are clear and consistently enforced. Chief Teresa Murphy is still leading the department as of March 2026. She still drives her Tesla. She still periodically conducts testing to ensure officers are following the law. And she still holds officers accountable when they cross the line. Norman Bishop still works in private security. He makes $42,000 a year instead of $89,000. His law enforcement career is over. His name is still the first result when you search for examples of racial profiling leading to termination. And the body cam footage of him reading his own termination letter is still shown in police academies as a warning about what happens when officers let bias override their oath to uphold the Constitution. Jerry Allen, the attorney who filed the first complaint against Bishop in 2021, testified at the arbitration hearing. He described being accused of drug trafficking despite having no criminal record. He described being searched without consent. He described filing a complaint and being told the investigation found no wrongdoing. When Allen heard Bishop had been fired by the new chief, he called Murphy personally to thank her. Carlos Rivera, the business owner whose complaint was dismissed in 2022, also testified. He described how his 12-year-old son had cried in the car after watching Bishop search their vehicle. How his son asked, "Why did the police officer think we were bad people?" Rivera told the arbitrator that his son still gets anxious when he sees police cars. Dr. Angela Foster, the physician who filed the third complaint in 2023, testified about being detained for 50 minutes and treated like a criminal despite showing registration and proof of ownership. She described the humiliation of being accused of driving a stolen vehicle while other drivers passed by and stared. She told the arbitrator that Chief Murphy's reform efforts had restored some of her faith in the department. The lesson was expensive. The lesson was public. The lesson was permanent. Driving an expensive car while black is not probable cause. Chiefs who test their officers aren't setting traps. They're identifying problems that have been ignored for too long. And officers who can't treat people fairly, regardless of race, don't deserve to wear a badge. Teresa Murphy never regretted the test. She had identified an officer who was violating rights, and she had removed him before he could harm anyone else. That was her job, and she did it without apology. If you believe a black woman should be able to drive her own car without being racially profiled, even by her own officers, share this story. What reforms do you think police departments need to eliminate racial bias in traffic stops? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this reminded you that accountability must start at the top and that chiefs who ignore patterns enable abuse, subscribe. We're not stopping until every officer understands that the Constitution applies to everyone, including the boss.